Hey, what's up, fam? Welcome back to the channel. Um, we did a reaction video on body language analysis reacts to Amber Heard, and we got a lot of views on that. I guess a lot of people like that video, so we're doing another one on body language analysis reacts to Johnny Depp's testimony. Um, Same channel. The guy's channel's name is Behavioral Arts. Go check him out. He got a lot of great content, a lot of good information over there. Um, Leave a comment if you like what you see. Leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And let's get this started. Give me a second.
Completely shocking because, as I said, it just didn't happen. I have had many creative conversations with.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts, and this is the video that a lot of you have been asking about all week in the comments, and here it is as promised. This is the body language and behavior analysis of Johnny Depp at his own trial when he's testifying, and there's a lot of really great stuff here with the verbal communication, the nonverbal communication, and we're going to dive right in, so let's start right now.
She was irate. She was irate, and she was possessed. And when I tried to remove myself as I normally would from a situation, and that is to say, as she's hammering me with sort of brutal words and
I want to begin by talking about one of the most important elements of analyzing body language and behavior, and that is establishing a baseline. Every now and then when I make a video and I talk about a sign of deception, there's a few people in the comments who might say, oh, well, I do that all the time even when I'm not lying. And that's the whole point. If you do it all the time, it's not significant. A baseline allows us to know how a person normally talks, how they normally move, so that when we're trying to analyze them to figure out what emotions they're experiencing or if they're being honest or deceptive, we can rule out certain things that they do naturally and regularly. And with Johnny Depp, there are some very interesting things about his baseline. First of all, you'll notice that naturally Johnny Depp has a very slow cadence. He measures his words, he speaks very slowly, and this is part of almost any interview I've ever seen him on. This is the way he speaks. This is even multiplied in this court because he knows all cameras, all eyes are on him, and every word out of his mouth, if it's even a little bit wrong, it'll be all over the media. So you'll notice he hesitates a lot, he stumbles on his words. He does something we call verbal disfluency, which is like stumbling in your speech, and typically that does contribute to a cluster of deception. Always remember, when we're looking for deception, one indication is never enough. We need to see multiple, and usually verbal disfluency is one of them, but in his case, it's part of his baseline. He also smiles, chuckles, and laughs a lot, almost inappropriately at times, but again, this is part of his baseline, and he does it the most when he says something awkward or uncomfortable, especially about himself. He has this nervous sort of chuckle. At his base, Johnny Depp is an introvert. I know it kind of sounds crazy because, he's this big actor and he makes these big movies, but think about the roles that he plays. He hides behind these extravagant, kind of crazy characters because he gets to hide who he is, his real self, behind all that craziness. There's a lot of indications that he's an introvert, and this sort of awkward kind of laughing is very common in introverts. Another part of his baseline is his eyebrows are very, very animated. He illustrates a lot with his eyebrows. There's a lot of activity. They go down, they go up. And this is because he's an experienced actor, an experienced storyteller, and the eyebrows can really change our face a lot. So he's used to doing that. But also, they very often do this thing where the inner corner goes up and the outer edges go down. And this is something that happens with sadness. I believe this is a sad person who has lived a lot of sad experiences, especially with what's going on right now. And sadness is one of 6 emotions that research has shown all humans experience the same way, and we see signs of it on the face, and this is one of them. Those eyebrows going like this, relaxed cheeks with that grief muscle. So this is part of his baseline.
I will live with that for the rest of my life because of the allegations and because it was such a high-profile case. So I lost then, no matter the outcome of this trial. I'll carry that for the rest of my days.
That clip is from the later part of his day 2 testimony, but I moved it up because I think it really shows his hand. It really shows his priorities in this case, because he's saying how the moment that this news came out, he already lost in the court of public opinion. And regardless of what happens here, that damage is done. And I think his priority is that, because there's a lot of clues that we're going to see throughout this testimony where he's not really that focused on actually winning the trial here, in terms of he doesn't want money, he doesn't want to win legally, but he wants to win in the public eye. Very often he reshifts the focus to things like reputation and what's going on out there and what his kids think and the fact that he wants them to hear his real story. So I think this corroborates just how much public opinion is really important to him.
I see a detail that I'd forgotten, which is the Missouri had taken my cigarette from the ashtray and stomped it out in my face here.
Throughout this video, I'm going to be talking a lot about deception versus honesty and a lot about abuse, which is a very sensitive subject, so I want to make something very clear. There are moments in this that I believe genuinely indicate that Johnny Depp was either abused or really believes legitimately that he was abused. But it doesn't mean that I believe it completely washes his hands like he's an innocent little lamb and he did nothing wrong.
Can you imagine? I mean, I don't know. I could never imagine taking a cigarette and putting it out on somebody's face. I mean, that's just demented. That's crazy.
I'm looking at the behavior here and I'm telling you what he believes, what I'm seeing indications of, but this doesn't mean that he didn't get out of hand at times. It doesn't mean that I in any way know the situation of how it escalated. I'm just talking about in those moments, he feels that there was real abuse. And this is one of those moments. He is talking about an altercation that happened, and it's a really long story and he goes into a lot of detail. Then they pull out a picture of that incident for him to point things out. And when he sees that picture, he remembers, oh yeah, by the way, she also grabbed my cigarette and burned me in the face. He forgot to mention that. And unless anyone out there thinks that this was a plan with his lawyers, like, listen, don't bring that up. And then when we bring the picture in, be like, oh yeah, by the way, the cigarette, because a behavior analyst might be looking at this and they'll be like, oh, that's good. Unless it's this big convoluted plan, that's crazy. The fact that in all this chaos, there's just so much happening in his head. There's so many instances to the point where he would forget a cigarette being put out on his face. To me, that indicates that this is a man who has suffered enormous amounts of abuse. Enough to forget something so drastic. We remember things that are rare or scarce in our lives with a lot more ease and detail than things that have happened a lot. So for example, if I ask you to tell me about a trip to Mexico, even if it was years ago, you're likely to give me more details and remember more because it was such an isolated or unique experience. But if I ask you to tell me about every sandwich you've ever had in your life, it's likely that you're going to forget quite a few sandwiches. And that's exactly the point I'm making here. For him to forget something to that extent, it must be that he suffered, or at least he believes that he suffered so much abuse that something like that will get lost in the shuffle. If somebody burnt a cigarette out on my face, I guarantee you I wouldn't forget that.
What if any MDMA and what if any drugs did you take that day?
Again, to be honest with you, I don't know how much MDMA they had, but for me, that was, for me to have taken MDMA would have been a waste of the drug. If you understand what I mean, it would have been essentially taking someone else's high, because it wouldn't have an effect on me.
So how many drugs did you actually take that day?
The day of our wedding,
Yes.
I smoked marijuana, and remember drinking. I don't remember that I was drinking then.
That response has a mini cluster of deception. Something about this question is stressing him out, and I think he's omitting something here. Let me tell you why. To begin, we see something called a perception qualifier because he begins his answer with, "to be honest with you." So this is something we listen for. Honestly, sincerely, to tell you the truth. This is a little psychological tactic we use to just convince people like, this is what's about to come out is serious. You have to believe me. Now I know, again, there are people watching this going, "Oh, I say honestly all the time. It's part of my speech." Again, if you say it all the time, it's part of your baseline. It doesn't matter. It's not part of his baseline. He does not use perception qualifiers very often. Also, please remember that cluster is important. Just one honestly, isolated in a speech with nothing else going on would be meaningless. But in this case, it's not alone. He answers the question of how much drugs he did, and his first answer is, "I don't know how much they had." That's irrelevant. That's got nothing to do with the question, and it's a non-answer statement. He is not answering the question at first. Then he switches over to say, "For me to have taken it, it would have been useless," which again is a non-answer statement. That doesn't answer the question, and to top it off, it's a failure to deny, which is very significant. The direct answer to that question would have been, "I did not take any MDMA." But for him to say, "I don't know how much they had," and for me to have taken it, it wouldn't have had an effect, it seems pretty dodgy. Then we have that she reiterates the question, says, "What drugs did you take that night?" And he reiterates there and he goes, "The day of our wedding?" Yeah, that's what you've been talking about this whole time. And this is a mechanism to buy time for ourselves. Typically when somebody answers a question with a question, especially a question to which he knows the answer, in this case, of course, the night of your wedding, that's what you're talking about. That's a mechanism to buy time. And finally at the end, he says, marijuana, and then I don't remember drinking. But again, if you really think about that, that's not a full denial. We call that an isolated denial. In other words, he's denying part of the question. What drugs did you do? I did marijuana. I don't remember if I drank, and then he changes the subject. So if he did do something else, that's still a truthful answer because he just listed things and then kind of change the topic of conversation. So I will say this again and again and again. None of these things alone is an indicator of deception. There's no such thing. There's no one thing that alone means someone is lying. But when you have two non-answer statements, an isolated denial, answering a question with a question, a perception qualifier right in the beginning, and a refusal to deny within the first question, the MDMA, that's a pretty decent cluster that something's being hidden here. Is it the most incriminating thing in the world? No. I just think he's not telling us the full truth pertaining to that evening. Now we're going to dive deeper into his story. We're going to look at some signs of deception, some signs of honesty. We're going to look at a reaction from Amber Heard to something Johnny Depp says that is really, really telling. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavior analysis.
It was all getting too crazy. And again, I had been sober for many, many months from alcohol and substances, aside from the marijuana. And I left the place, the room that I was hiding in, or not hiding, locked myself into. And I went downstairs in the house. Downstairs in the house, as soon as you walk in the house, you can go upstairs or downstairs. Downstairs, there was a sort of a rec area, pool table and such, and there was a bar.
At the time that I'm filming this video, we are at the end of day 2 of Johnny Depp's testimonials. So we have seen more than 7 hours of him testifying, and I've watched it all, and I've isolated clips where I think we're seeing really interesting stuff when it comes to behavior. Now, he's going to testify some more. Amber Heard is eventually going to testify, and eventually I will do a follow-up to cover more of this, especially what she's going to be saying on the stand. But if you guys want to follow this more closely, I am regularly appearing on the live streams of a channel called Legal Bites, which is an incredible live stream because it's some of the best lawyers in the world who are commenting on this from a legal standpoint. And I pop in every now and then to give some tips and what I'm seeing with the body language and the behavior. So if you guys want to follow this carefully and see some of my thoughts in smaller increments, please go follow her. I will leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you guys there. But the clip we just saw is a small isolated clip from a really long story he tells about an incident where they had an argument and she threw liquor bottles at him and he ended up severely damaging his middle finger. There's something really interesting about the structure of the story here, especially given his baseline, and it's the extreme amount of detail that he's giving to set up the scene. So he's saying, even when he's like, I go into the house and there's an up and a down, and he's talking about the number of rooms that there are, and he's like, there's the pool, there's a pool table and the bar, and all these details that don't really matter very much. He also begins this whole stretch with what we call a convincing statement or a resume statement when he says, I'd been sober for many, many months. Convincing statements are things that we say to build our character, and he's starting with that. So we can look at this and say, well, that's strange. He's starting with a convincing statement, and he's giving all these unnecessary details. Is this deceptive? What's going on? But remember what I said in the previous video. One of the biggest researchers on the subject of lie detection determined in his research that when someone is telling the truth, but they fear that they're not going to be believed, they will show signs of deception as much as someone who is being deceptive. A lot of the same signs. And being over-specific and building character are some of those signs. So it's very likely that he's saying, I'd been sober for many months, just for us and the jury to understand that, he was drinking that night, but it had been a while. He's trying to emphasize how bad it had gotten for him to break that streak. And all these details could very well be because he's scared that the jury won't believe him. So and we see him, by the way, those confirmation glances towards the jury. He wants them to really be there in their minds and understand what happened. So you tell me, is it deceptive, or is it simply he really wants to get this narrative across the way he wants it to be understood?
And then hurled it at me. And it just went right past my head and smashed behind me.
That is one of my favorite clips from this entire testimony, because that story that he's telling right there, he told it in his deposition 4 years ago, and it's crazy to what extent he's telling it almost the exact same way. And this is something we look for, consistency. Are there things that are way off? Angle shifts, did something in the mind change? But the way he's telling it, down to the gesture. When he goes, the bottle went right by his ear. It's not went right by my ear, went right by my ear. It's that same gesture. And at that same moment with the bottle, we see that same smile as he does that thing with his eyes where he's reliving it and he's reconnecting with that memory. This also touches on one of the bigger challenges of doing an analysis like this, and that's the fact that Johnny Depp is a phenomenal actor. And there are certain things he can, channel, and there are certain emotions that he can play. It's his job. He's really good at doing that. But in this case, it's almost evidence that we're not seeing a whole bunch of acting here, because if he was going to act this out, he wouldn't smile there. It's a weird place for a smile. He knows that if you're in a serious moment, a smile can seem not genuine. So in that moment, it's an awkward place for him to have that consistent smile, but both times, 4 years ago and now, he smiles at that exact moment. This indicates to me that he's re-experiencing it the same way, and it's the same emotions and that same awkward kind of feeling that's coming out that's causing him to smile. Now, I'm not going to discount the fact that he's over the years developed a certain rhythm for telling this story, and after telling it multiple times, he's come up with the cadence and the way to tell the jokes and where the comparisons are. And that's really highlighted when he says this.
And it looked like Vesuvius, and
that's the exact same simile that he used in the deposition. He said it was like Vesuvius.
completely shattered. I mean, it looked like Vesuvius.
It's kind of crazy how he's using that same sort of comparison, and it kind of looks there. I don't know if you guys feel the same, but it kind of looks like he just thought of that on the spot. But again, this is an experienced storyteller, and maybe he forgot the word, and maybe he was like, oh, Vesuvius. But this is a way he's told it before. He's compared this finger to Vesuvius. We saw it in the deposition, but I promise you he's done it several times since. So there is a rhythm to telling this story, but that smile in the moment where he was talking about the bottle, I don't believe that that was planned, and I believe that he was re-experiencing that moment the same way.
I started to write with my blood, in my own blood, on the walls little reminders from our past that essentially represented lies that she had told me and lies that I had caught her in.
That's weird. That's a really weird thing to say in the middle of a testimonial. And there are two opposing ways to look at this. And I'm gonna tell you both. So the first way to look at it is nobody who's guilty of something is gonna bring something weird like that up. Because why would you say something like that? Unless you're just kind of spilling it all out and you don't care what happens, you just wanna be honest and give all the facts. Why would you? Nobody asked him about that, by the way. Nobody said, hey, by the way, did you cut your finger and start writing things on the wall? Nobody asked that. He volunteered that. So that's one way to look at it. Like, there is no way, unless he's trying to just put everything down on the table, that he would bring that up. The second way to look at it would be if he thinks that she's going to bring it up, which is a reasonable assumption, that she would be like, oh yeah, by the way, after our little fight with the vodka bottles, he used his finger as a Sharpie to write some messages on the wall. That's something she might bring up. And he's just trying to get ahead of it, to be like, listen, I was in this kind of really messed up and this is why I did it. And kind of presenting it so casually for the jurors to go, oh, well, okay, I guess that's a thing. So that when she brings it up, it'll be less shocking. So I don't know which one it is. In either case, that's a weird thing.
When you're in a relationship and you do give your truth to intimate truths to that person that you're with, and then they start to use all that information and stretch it out into something that is completely shocking, because as I said, it just didn't happen.
I'm going to make a call right now. A lot of the subscribers on this channel are natural empaths. These are people who have a really strong intuition and can very easily connect with the emotional experience of someone else. And I bet that the empaths that are watching this were emotionally heavily impacted by what we just saw. It's a very vulnerable and real moment. First of all, when he talks about giving yourself in a relationship, first of all, notice there's some turtling going on. Now, this has been going on a lot throughout the entire testimony. He is feeling defensive. Turtling is what we do when we become smaller like this and our neck comes down, our shoulders come up. We're protecting all our vulnerabilities. It's not out of place. He's been doing it the entire time. But when he talks about how you connect with someone in a relationship, when he goes, you give your, and his hand comes up here as he gestures, he's signaling the heart, the soul, how much of himself he gave. And as he says the truth, something really significant happens. He brings the mic closer to him. Now, this isn't the first time he approaches the mic, but other times it was like he noticed that they can't hear him and he brought it closer. In this case, that's not what happened. It was almost an involuntary, sort of bringing it closer because he wants to speak his truth. Again, this is Johnny Depp. Can he act that? Yes, he can. Do I think he's acting that? No, I don't.
Which was very odd to me, as I have had many creative conversations with...
That is intense. A lot of you in the comments have been asking me to talk about Amber Heard's reaction to Johnny Depp's testimony. And it's crazy how it's been a roller coaster. On day one, she was doing a very classic Amber Heard thing, not just with Johnny Depp, but with a lot of his witnesses, where whenever her eyes looked at them, it wouldn't last for more than a second or two before she looked away. And this is a very classic thing she does with those shifty eyes. I've talked about her shifty eyes in the previous video, but it's sort of like she go like this and then she looks away and then she goes like this, and it's these quick bursts. She never really held eye contact. But on day two, there was a lot of moments we saw where she was just looking at him. The blink rate was very increased, but again, this is common for her. And we saw, there were moments where we saw sadness. We saw the droopy lips. We saw the inner corners coming up. We saw a bit of that grief muscle. So there were moments of sadness. I genuinely believe that she was coached. I think that her lawyer said, okay, we've looked at the footage and there's this sort of carelessness to you. When he's getting vulnerable, when he's getting sad, we need you to look at him and look like you're emotionally invested. So Is she, now that she's paying attention, actually getting emotionally invested? Or is she putting on this sad face? It's almost impossible for me to tell you. I'm not in the room questioning her to try to see, when are the emotions coming and going. But in this moment, what we saw is very telling. Johnny Depp is on the stand in a very vulnerable moment, falling apart, talking about, and at this point, how he lost his Disney contract. She's looking at him and she turns to her lawyer and smiles. She actually smiles and then instantly does two different mechanisms that we use to block a smile. One of them is biting the inner lip, like inside the mouth. And we see her do that because we see the lips going in as she bites down. Then her hand comes up and she does what we call mouth blocking, which is something we do typically to block emotion from coming out, like not saying something that we're supposed to say. She does that instantly as a reflex because she smiled. I don't understand how a human being can look at another human being who's falling apart and smile. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, especially someone that you were close to, you were married to, and I get it. I get that there were some arguments and her narrative is that he's a horrible person. But even at that, I'm not expecting you to cry and be all broken up about it, but you were looking sad a second ago. What happened? Why are you smiling about this? I'm just really not a big fan of that smile, especially because she knows it's not a good move and immediately tries to block it and bite the lips. So I think she slipped up here for a sec that she's actually taking pleasure in his misery. And please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying he's a saint. I'm not saying he's done nothing wrong. I'm just saying it's weird to smile at someone else falling apart. I want to comment on something else that we're seeing in this scene, and every time the camera cuts to Amber Heard, and it's that handle of that luggage sticking up right next to her. Now, I know it's not hers. I know it's one of the lawyers, but if I was the head lawyer of Amber Heard's side, I would give a mountain of reprimand to whatever lawyer left their handle up right next to Amber Heard, because already Amber Heard's demeanor, and this is being reflected all over social media in a lot of the comments of the videos that I'm seeing on this, she already has a very dismissive attitude, a very sort of, I'm above this, I don't need to be here attitude, with those shifty eyes, with that chin up, with the way she just is generally, there's already that vibe. So to see a luggage next to her propped up, we're getting ready to get out of here, contributes to that image. And it's not a good look. Her lawyers should be working on diminishing that, not increasing that. And I know most people realize that it's not hers and this isn't being done on purpose, but don't discount what our subconscious mind picks up, especially because our subconscious mind often just picks up the bigger image. So every time the jury looks at her and sees that luggage there, it could be unsettling to them that why does it look like they just want to not be here? They want to leave. So to me, that handle sticking up like that, not a good decision.
At the top of this, I've never seen this version of the op-ed piece. The version that I saw was the other one that I identified that was on the 18th. This is on the 19th. I believe the 18th.
In 2 years
quite
before...
possibly, was quite possibly, maybe that was the online version that came out first.
2 years before either the online or the print.
I'm sorry, I was just going to finish my
I think you
answer.
answered my question, sir. Thank you.
Surely you're all seeing what I'm seeing. A completely different Johnny Depp. This, by the way, is during the cross-examination. In other words, it's now Amber Heard's lawyers who are asking him questions, and you got to go watch the whole video. You absolutely have to. Well, not the whole video. It's 5 hours long, but just watch a bit of the beginning where we see that sort of slower hesitation with the disfluency and then the sort of taking his time. And when the cross-examination starts, he is answering faster. His cadence is up. There's more, there's some confrontation there that we saw. There's also some sass. He's throwing in these little sort of jokes and sort of condescending remarks here and there.
Who beat women suddenly in my 50s.
And what I personally noticed in that clip right there is almost like his mannerisms and his way of speaking is so much closer to Jack Sparrow than Johnny Depp. Listen to the way he says version.
I've never seen this version.
That's a very Jack Sparrow way of saying it. And he's got that gesture to the screen. To me, it's like he's channeling Captain Jack Sparrow, or this character who's more confident, who's not little introverted Johnny Depp trying to get his story out, but this sort of more taking control and like, hey, you're not going to bully me around because you're representing the wrong side character. And it's a marvel to see this whole different side of him.
Worldwide talk about me being this wife beater.
Understood, but
I'm sure that Disney was trying to cut ties to be safe.
In the entire testimony of 7 hours plus, the two most important words that he said for me were right there. When he said this worldwide talk about me being a wife beater. A wife beater is a very vicious, like it paints such a horrible image in someone's mind. It's such a vicious, aggressive thing. Now, I want to talk about psychological distancing. Very often in criminal interrogations, when we're talking to a guilty party, we see something called psychological distancing where they use words that aren't as bad to describe what happened. So instead of calling it a murder or call it killing someone, they might say something like hurting someone or touching someone, even if they're denying it. So they might say something like, oh, no, I didn't hurt that person. I wasn't, I never touched that person. So things along those lines. The reason for this is that by using these smaller, weaker words, they are reducing how intense what they did is. Now, we don't always see psychological distancing. Of course, nothing is 100%, but for him to choose in that moment to use the word wife beater really shows me that he is not connecting that action with himself. Because if he was, he would say something like, and the whole world sees me as this aggressive person, or the whole world sees me as this really mean person, but wife beater. I can promise you that his legal team, if they were asked, should he ever use that term on the stand, they would say no. That paints such a vicious image. And it goes to show everything I was saying throughout this video. I think he just wants to lay down the truth. He doesn't like the fact that he was portrayed as a wife beater, and he's not scared to use that word because it's a horrible thing, but it has nothing to do with him. So at the very least, in his own head, he's not a wife beater. Because if he was, he wouldn't use that term. He would use something less intense because he is, in his own mind, talking about his own actions. So what is my overall analysis of this whole thing? I think that for the most of this, we're seeing a man who wanted this opportunity. I mean, he brought this lawsuit on, so he paid to have this moment to just pour out the truth. I think his main priority here is to tell his story. He even makes a couple of references to how it doesn't matter how this ends up, how this trial ends up. He wants the world to know his truth. He wants his children to know the truth. And I think that's most what we're getting here, his version of the truth. Can I 100% confirm that he was never aggressive, he was never violent, he never lost his temper? I can't. I can only tell you that in his own head, from his own perception, and that's what I analyze, behavior. As far as he's concerned, he is not an abuser. He is a victim of abuse. But as I said earlier, there's a lot of time left. We're going to see more from him. We're going to see Amber Heard. Eventually, I will cover it. I have another video I need to get out of the way, but I will circle back to this and give you guys more thoughts. In the meantime, let me know in the comments what you thought.